Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part 7 as we look at the Protestant Reformation. And this is where we left off. We finished with John Calvin and his theology, some points of his theology. So now let's turn to the Protestant Reformation in England with King Henry VIII. And to say something to set up this look here of Protestantism in England, I remember one of my colleagues telling me how she mentioned to one of her cousins, I believe, that the only reason why you're a Baptist is because Henry VIII could not get an annulment from his wife. Well, there is some truth behind that statement. Um, the United States is a predominantly Protestant nation because of what took place in England with Henry VIII. Had Henry VIII received his annulment from his wife, from Catherine of Aragon, and had the history carried on where the United States was formed, the chances are very good that the United States would be a predominantly Catholic country. While there would be Protestants in the United States, they would mostly be in urban areas and they would not have come from the British Isles, more than likely. But the roots for the Reformation in England were sown by Henry VIII's desperate need to have a legitimate male heir. I remember when I was a teenager, and at the church that I attended, there were these pamphlets from the Knights of Columbus. The Knights of Columbus is a Catholic fraternal organization. And one of them was called Christendom in the 16th century. And essentially, it dealt with Protestantism. And one of the things I remember, I mean, I don't remember legitimately what it said, but it kind of implied with Henry VIII, Henry Tudor, how he was trying to, fulfill his lustful desires. Well, when you look at the situation regarding Henry from a more objective perspective, it's a lot more complex than that. Why was a male heir so important? Well, for one reason, the Tudor dynasty was a very, very young dynasty in England. It was started by Henry VIII's father, Henry VII, and there were rumors going around how the beginnings of the Tudor dynasty, the Tudor bloodline, essentially came from the bastard son of a brewer. While that would be impossible to prove, both, back then and now, if people were still going around saying it, it was cause for concern because England, within about a generation, I guess you could say, or so, before Henry, it had been right before Henry's birth, so around a generation, England was involved in a what we could call a royal family civil war called the War of the Roses, which Henry VIII's father, Henry VII, essentially ended. But, if rumors are going around how the Tudor dynasty began with a bastard son of a brewer, that is an issue. And of the children that Henry VIII had that were legitimate, he did have an illegitimate son with a mistress, but that child could not claim the throne. Him and his wife had a daughter, Mary, who would eventually get the throne. And there was no law that stated that Mary could not, inherit the throne upon the death of her father. But Henry was worried that she would not be accepted for a number of different reasons, but one of those reasons is because of the fact that supposedly, people were whispering that, the Tudor dynasty was started by the bastard son of a brewer. So if a female monarch was to take over, there was the fear that, rival factions, those that, certainly didn't completely agree with this new dynasty, might get supporters and try to overthrow it. So, when Henry's wife, Catherine of Aragon, could not produce a male heir, at least one to live, Henry and Catherine did have sons, but they died in infancy. Henry sought to have his marriage annulled. One of the questions that is sometimes asked is, what is the difference between an annulment and a divorce? Because you do not receive a divorce within the Catholic Church, you receive an annulment. Well, the common question is, what's the difference? Well, both do involve a separation, but there is a difference. With a divorce, it is argued that the marriage was at one time valid. With an annulment, the argument is the marriage was never valid from the beginning. And that's the case here with Henry VIII, that he felt his marriage never should have taken place. And the reason why he argued this is because he was married to his brother's widow. Catherine originally was betrothed to Henry's brother Arthur. During this time period, and it was still true up until really the early 20th century, that a lot of times within the royal families in Europe, their marriages were arranged and they were arranged to form alliances. And in the case with Catherine and Arthur, this was arranged by their parents. Catherine's parents were Ferdinand and Isabella. Isabella was the one that financed Columbus's voyage. Their marriage was arranged for them when they were about 2 years of age. And they're married for about a year, and then Arthur dies. And with the death of Prince Arthur, there essentially went the alliance with Spain, which is why it was formed. Alliance between Spain and England. Well, Henry VII, who of course is Henry VIII's father, he also found himself as a widower. And there were talks about him marrying this, widowed princess who is essentially his daughter-in-law. But he said, no, we're not going to do that. And what is going to happen is that my new heir, which would be Henry, the future Henry VIII, he is going to marry Catherine. And so they get a dispensation from Pope Julius II, the Bishop of Rome, and the marriage takes place. But Henry felt that God had cursed him by this happening, something that in many respects was beyond his control. But, he felt God had cursed him, that the marriage should never taken place, and now he wants to have the marriage annulled. Well, the Pope at the time, the Bishop of Rome, Clement VII, he looked favorably at first on Henry's request, but he never acted on it. Um, Henry saw himself as a good Catholic. One of the titles that the English monarch has, and still does to this day, is the title Defender of the Faith. That is a title that was given to Henry VIII from Pope Leo X, the Bishop of Rome. Henry VIII, I believe, along with Sir Thomas More, wrote a treatise titled Defense of the Seven Sacraments, which defended the traditional number of sacraments, seven, against Luther's argument that there's really only two. And so Henry is awarded the title of Defender of the Faith, which the current monarch still holds to this day as I'm recording this. Charles III still holds the title of Defender of the Faith. So, figured that this would not be a serious issue, and the Pope did look favorably on Henry's request, but he never acted on it. Well, why didn't he act on it? Well, Clement VII, he was having his own problems, his own issues with Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of Spain, and the nephew of Henry VIII. But Charles' relationship with Henry was not through him, but through his wife, Catherine. Catherine was his aunt by blood, as Catherine and Charles's mother were sisters. And I don't have his mother's name here. I believe Joanna, I think that was her name. I'm not for certain. I don't have her name in front of me. But regardless of which, that was where his family connections were. And so for the Pope to grant an annulment, this would have been disgraceful in many respects to Catherine. Because the thing again with an annulment is that it states that the marriage was never valid from the beginning, that it never should have taken place. So this would mean that Catherine was never really the Queen of England. So what does the Pope do about this? Well, in short, he doesn't do anything. Because he thought, in many respects, that this was somewhat of a case, I guess you could say, of much to do about nothing, that Henry is making a big deal out of nothing. And, within just give it time and it will all go away, it'll all blow over, and everything will be well. Well, that's of course not how history turned out. There is a letter that was found in the Vatican archives. It was always known that it existed, but it was lost. But it was written by the English bishops and by a number of the English nobility to the Bishop of Rome, to the Pope, where essentially they told him, if you don't do something about this, he's going to. Well, I think that we will stop here, and when we come back, we will certainly finish up one of the last bits regarding um, Protestantism in England, and then move into some of the common elements that you find within Protestantism. So take care. I will symbolically see you then.